So hello and welcome to Transform Gov, the Digital Government Podcast, and I'm your host, Maeve Neefsey. So in every episode, as you know, we bring you the top names behind some of the most exciting transformative government digital projects. And it's your chance really to get inside tips from talented leaders who've been there and done that before. And on this episode, we meet Louise Jevens. And Louise is the current CIO with the Department of Justice and started in the civil service directly from school.
Yes.
With a plan just to try it for a while. But 30 years later, having, amongst other things, played important roles in digitising social welfare, leading the Pulse implementation for Garda Síochána, being involved in the Department of Taoiseach, and then the e-Cabinet, which you'll talk about later on, and then the Public Appointments Commission, is that correct?
Yeah, Public Appointment Service.
Yeah, a service, and the Department of Agriculture. But she's still loving it.
Absolutely.
30 years later. So you're very, very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you.
So it was an opportunity you had, you were telling me, when you first went in to do a competition. Is that right?
Yeah, so I did. I joined the civil service straight from school and I ended up working in the Department of Social Welfare as it was then. And I suppose a promotion opportunity came up to do a competition for the computer programmer or computer analyst. Kind of an aptitude test, really.
Okay, so you didn't have to have any previous
You didn't have to have
experience.
No, absolutely. So they ran this competition which included the aptitude test. And I was very successful and lucky to get it. And then they took a group of about 14 of us in and classroom trained us in the Department of Social Protection in coding and COBOL over kind of 12 weeks. And then they put us out working with senior programmers who were really, really good mentors, I suppose.
And these are people, again, in the public service already?
Yes, these were programmers who had a number of years' experience under their belt in the department. And then they mentored us and then they managed us. And we were straight in at the coalface, programming systems that paid huge sums of money out to the public on benefits.
So. On benefits, exactly.
Yep.
I mean, I was thinking about you in our conversation earlier, and one of the things that came into my head was, you know, you've been involved in fantastic projects, and we'll talk about those. But did you ever get tempted to go, I'd love to go out now and work for Microsoft and in a different environment, or I'd like to go and work for ChatGPT and lead a big, huge digital project in the private sector?
Yeah, like I did get opportunities. I was approached on several occasions, but I think maybe it's a mentality thing. It's the public service piece that I really enjoy, and, you know, doing something that you can see the benefit of it. And I've been lucky enough to be in a number of government departments and see it from different customers, different service we're providing. And I really like that. You can see what you're doing in the news, like where I am in the Department of Justice. Every day you open the newspaper or see the news, there's a story there that you know you're doing something in terms of services to try and support that challenge that the department has, or you know, to address a customer need. So that's really why I didn't go out. I did have opportunities.
So I suppose you have an impact, but in a really positive way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Exactly. So would you encourage people, you know, who, if you're a young person and maybe think of doing computer science, to go into the public service?
I really would. Yeah. And we try to encourage that. Like we do take in interns from colleges, just to let them see what it's like. Like it's a completely different world from working in the private sector, and just to give them the opportunity for whether it's 6 months or a year or whatever to work with us and see, you know, what it's like working in the public sector in IT, because it's very different, but it's incredibly rewarding, I think.
In what way is it different? I mean, because I presume they give you feedback themselves when they come in and they have an experience.
Well, the difference really is it's not driven by financial requirements,
commercial concerns. Yeah, it's
very pressured at times because you're driven by, you know, the government of the day, the political demands, the social problems of the day. So it's that driver is different, and it's really rewarding when you are involved in a project, and it's a very, very, very much a team environment.
Yeah.
Now you do get to work with the private sector as well, because we work hand in hand with consultants as well. So it's a really good environment, I think, to work with the business, work with your colleagues and teams in designing and delivering services. So it's a good experience.
Okay. Well, that's really encouraging. I mean, it'd be great to see young people coming into the public sector, you know, and giving them a different experience, because I suppose working in tech in some of the big tech companies is different pressures.
Yep.
And I think young people want to work somewhere where they can make an impact, a positive impact. And I think that's probably at the forefront of their mind, more so than when I was younger.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. And there's some college courses that are focused on that as well, which, you know, we're working with UL on a project on that as well. So it's really good to bring people in, young people with really new ideas, who know the new technologies better than we do ourselves as well. So it's given them examples. They've given something to us and we're giving something back in terms of the environment they're working in.
Very good. Well, look, let's go back a little bit then to social protection. So what projects were you involved in at the early stages?
Yeah, so social protection was, and I think revenue as well, there were both departments that embraced technology very, very early for the reason they saw the value. There were some really good visionary business leaders and Secretary General's management boards in social protection at the time who saw the benefit of, the scalability of technology when you're paying out huge amounts of money, the controls you can introduce, all that sort of the benefit of that. So I think there was actually a very, very influential person and figure from my career in those days would have been, and she probably never even knew me, but Joan Connolly was, she was a PO, a principal officer in social welfare at the time. And they saw the benefit of integrating all our siloed schemes. So we set off on our journey it was called ISTIS. It's still there, still running to this very day.
Wow.
So it was about taking all of the short-term schemes and putting them together on a single platform, delivering it as a platform, single view of the customer. So that was a really, really exciting project to work on.
And did you see kind of a mind shift happening in terms of, I suppose if you think about it, digitization, or at the early stages when we were looking at it, was very much take an existing system, don't redesign it, put it online. Whereas I think there was a big shift going on, wasn't there, about thinking about not just systems, but thinking about people. So did you experience that during that time when you were in that department?
Very much. It was, as you said, there was a lot of system thinking. There were a lot of really experienced technical people who were using, and tech, as you know, the use of IT has changed very much over the years.
Yeah.
And it's gone from where the technology was first and the service or the user was last, and we're flipping completely. But yes, from my perspective, it started out as a system that would deliver the business benefits of scalability, paying huge amount of money, keeping track of it. And to now, when it's a front end service, it's mywelfare.ie, it's inviting the customers in and directing them to the services that are appropriate to their situation. It's become that sort of, we're providing a service and the customer is the focus of that service.
Yeah, I mean, I would notice, and I'm sure other people will see it themselves, that when you try and engage with government now, particularly around things like benefits, or some sort of requirement that you have to engage with government, that there's a bigger attitude or change in attitude, I suppose, from thinking, well, no, we'll protect you the information we have as much as possible. Here's the information. Let's make it accessible to you, so you kind of know what you're due.
100%.
Would that be is that mind shift? How did that happen though? I mean, that's a big change from kind of protecting to opening up.
Well, I suppose there would have always been people who had that mindset. There were, as I said, secretaries general and people who felt that like data is power, as you know, and information is power. But the way you improve your services is by opening up and using the data that you have, analysing the data you have to make better decisions, better policy choices, better policy decisions. And that, I suppose, leads in turn to then better services for the customer and opening up those services. And I've seen that over the course of my life in IT, in public sector, that's very much, we've gone from designing systems with process in mind to designing systems with people in mind and providing the service to the people.
Well, it's such a big shift and such a positive shift.
Yep.
And it's really interesting in terms of the CIO role, because there seems to be a much bigger role for the CIO in terms of using data. And you just mentioned they're influencing policy. So is there a role for CIOs then to kind of come with ideas and come with data insights to try and influence the policymakers?
There is, absolutely. And I think that's been recognised in the CIO, certainly in civil services. Largely, most departments have a seat at management board. And that's been transformative from our perspective. Because we do have that data, we know where the data is, we design the systems with it. So it does enable us to come with that insight or enable our business colleagues and our policy colleagues to derive insight from what we have in terms of data. And I would have seen that like in the Department of Agriculture, for instance. So when I worked in the Department of Agriculture, I established the data analytics unit there. And the business there were very, very responsive to like important things like disease tracking and preventing disease in animals and, looking at age profiles of veterinary practice, like huge amount of information that's available if you look at data and you analyse it and model it. So bigger departments particularly have taken they've taken the approach of using the data they have and data that other people have, matching it and then deriving the insight then that can feed back into the policy.
So social protection was your first. Where did you go then?
From social protection then, I actually went to An Garda Síochána. The Pulse project was just kicking off.
We all know the Pulse project. So we have to ask you questions about the Pulse project. So that was a big challenge, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a big challenge, but it was a great
both
project.
Technically and on a people level.
Yeah. It was, yeah. It was a different organisation from social protection in terms of culture and in terms of the business service we're providing, because effectively the users of the system were out on the field.
Yeah.
Out on the beat. So, you didn't have business users sitting in offices. You were designing for people who had already developed their own process and their own, culture of collecting their information and, in their notebooks.
And just remind us before we get into that, what was the logic behind Pulse? Were you looking at other systems worldwide and saying we need to do this, or what was the kind of role of Pulse?
Well, the role of Pulse really was that sort of to take the central view of everything that was happening, and it was, and like it provided the core of what Garda analysis today. Now, my role in it at that time, I was a technical programmer. So my role was to design and build technical parts of the systems. But from the system perspective, there's data out in a Garda station in a big logbook, or it's in a Garda notebook, and it's distributed around the whole country. And it was about centralising that and being able, again, it's that theme of data, being able to look at all of the data cohesively and join up the stories, join up the data and, get your insight, your intelligence from that, whatever way you want to describe it. So.
And give us an example of what, maybe before and after, to give a sense of it. I mean, I know you talked to me when we spoke earlier about the stolen bike.
Yeah. So like that was a scenario. So beforehand, maybe, there was a bicycle stolen in, say, West Cork.
Yeah.
And you live in Cork City.
Yeah.
And that was in a Garda station in rural Cork somewhere, and it was in somebody's log in the station. The sergeant knew about it. But in order to find that out, if you, reported in Cork City, somebody would have to ring around all the Garda stations and go, did anybody find a bike? So it was that sort of, instant information. Once you centralised that incident was captured, and then you had access to search the data to see red bicycle, whatever.
Yeah.
So it just immediately made an impact from that perspective, as to, sharing information across the organisation.
And I suppose with all big projects like that, when you've got dispersed, workforce all over the country like the Garda, you're going to have resistance, or you're going to have people who are sceptical about it, or maybe they refuse to use it. So what kind of challenges on the kind of culture and human side were you coming up against?
Yeah, well, there was a whole team of people set up there. Actually, it was one of the first places I kind of witnessed change management done in a really effective way. And it was about, there was a project team there who got out on the ground within the stations, brought people from the stations into the team itself. And, they helped inform the design of the system. They were listened to. It, change management, I suppose, prior to that, it wasn't really taken seriously. And as you said, you could end up building a system, rolling it out, and people going, well,
doesn't
you
work.
ask me about this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And not using it. So you've got a system that doesn't work. So I suppose Garda management themselves knew that, in order for this project to be a success, that it had to involve the input of the regular users of the system and the regular Gardaí on the street and in all various areas around the organisation. So it was a very good project from that perspective. And I gained a lot of, and even though I didn't work on the change management team, my colleagues worked there, I gained a lot of experience there, and I took that forward with me then for other projects. This is really the way you have to go.
And how long did you work on the Pulse project?
I was there for 3 years. So literally from the time we started building it till the time we started rolling it out. And was lucky enough to see it rolled out to several Garda stations before I moved on.
Yeah. yeah. I mean, it's great to see a project from the beginning right through, isn't it? To
It
actually
is,
see it live.
absolutely, yeah.
And often when you talk to somebody about a project, they forget the bad stuff. It's funny, but if you were to go back and do that project again, were there any things that you think I'd do that differently, that you were learnings that you kind of brought with you? I understand change management is a big part, but anything else?
Well, I suppose the technology was different because previously, like the social welfare technology was kind of like mainframe development. So when I moved on to Pulse, that was a completely different technology stack. So it was very much client-server based. And sure, we know it goes cyclically in IT. But so it was my first experience there of working client-server. So it was that other bit of designing the interface for the user.
Yeah.
So that was another thing I picked up there early on. And we were kind of constrained slightly by what we could do with the tools we had at the time.
Yeah.
I think it was Visual Basic version 3 or 4, I think. We thought it was great at the time. It was very advanced.
Sure, listen, I remember all those things. I mean, the interface we had was so bad compared to what we have now.
What we have now, yeah. So, bringing those sort of learnings forward, like always look at, who's going to be using this system? How will it be easy? How does it impinge or not impinge on their day-to-day work? How does it interact? How does it make it smoothly operate in their environment? So that would have been one of the things I learned from it. Working cohesively in teams, like agile wasn't a thing then.
Yeah.
But we did we worked very closely in type of agile teams because I was on the technical team. We were building out a technical architecture. We also worked very closely with our business users and our interface design people. So I think IT has always been good for that, for team working. But to me, it showed the value of working closely with the business users.
Yeah, exactly. And so did you do things in an agile way in the terms of, did you do releases?
We did. Yeah,
which would have been unusual. Yeah.
We had like weekly releases and I was in charge of the configuration management piece at one point. And it was a good opportunity. One of the things about that project was we were very structured in the way we did it. We took a very much a very architected, structured approach to it that I have brought really with me to everything.
Yeah. Each role you bring something with you. And
you do, yeah.
Did you go then and have maternity leave and come back and were promoted? Is that what happened around this time as well?
Yeah, I went to the Department of Agriculture. I was promoted and went into the Department of Agriculture to work with Philip O'Reilly was the CIO there at the time. Another very visionary guy actually, and he wanted to change the architecture for delivery of services from the Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
So I worked there for about 18 months. Kind of, we went to open source then. So, it was a completely different technology.
That was very early in open source,
It was very early and we decided that it was actually an appropriate choice for us. We went and we designed the architecture around a back-end database in Java and open source tools.
And would you have gone and looked at, coming up with the concept of, okay, this is right for us. Obviously you had things you were checklisting off, but would you get an opportunity to look at what others were doing and kind of engage with them, other governments or other departments of agriculture in different countries, or how did you go about it?
Well, it didn't, the architecture didn't really, from a Department of Agriculture perspective, yes, we did. We actually worked with the Finns. I remember we had a meeting with the Finns who were doing something very similar at the time. Now, I think regardless, I think what we were doing, we were replatforming everything onto a single platform. It's that sort of centralized approach as well.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that we were using Java or whatever we were using, but the Finns were using something similar, taking a similar approach. So we did speak to them, but generally I would reach out to colleagues. I've obviously got quite good networks around government, so I would have reached out to colleagues in social protection, agriculture, guards, people that I'd worked with before when we were looking at technologies, as well as obviously looking at the technologies themselves.
And was it just thinking at the time when you started, it would have been pretty unusual for a female to be working in IT? Were you the lone female voice at the table?
Well, no, in the beginning not, because as I said, that in social protection, when they ran that competition, it was a promotion competition. So people went for it regardless of whether they were male or female. So there's quite a good balance at that level when I was programming, and really good female programmers. I think looking at myself and some of my colleagues, if we had chosen, we went to college later on and did the college at night. We did IT at night. If we were in school...
Did you do that in Trinity?
In Trinity,
Trinity.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if we had been choosing straight from school, we wouldn't have chosen IT. But having landed in social protection and got an opportunity for promotion, ending up and realising, well, actually, we're good at this. So it was a good balance of female and male at programmer level. I think at the more senior levels, no, it was definitely less females, and also in different areas in IT. So in the technical areas where I would have worked quite a bit, technical architecture and so on and so forth, you would see less female, and you would often be the only female in the room at a meeting with, consultants or with your colleagues trying to, get your point across.
Yeah.
And again, like at the top level, it's only recently that we're starting to see, and there's 3 female CIOs in government at the moment. And
what departments are they?
So Department of Agriculture,
yeah.
And the CSO as well, actually, in Cork.
Yeah.
So the 3 of us started in around the same time. And I see it also like places like Vodafone, Microsoft, they all have female leads, female CIOs. So I don't know if it was IT was affected by the same thing as everybody else in other professions in terms of women coming in and then leaving the workforce for whatever family reasons.
Yes.
That might have delayed that, but it's good to see now we're seeing more females at the top of the table.
And is there a mentoring kind of involved in your experience in terms of you going through in your career through the public service? Do they have mentors, or is it informal?
There's definitely informal mentoring. Okay. I would have a group of senior female colleagues that we would regularly get together and, discuss our challenges from a business perspective. And support each other as well. It's a nice environment.
And in terms of you did take some time off then after that, did you? You were in the Department of Agriculture, and then
I took some time off, and then I was promoted while I was out on leave, and ended up coming back. I was on maternity leave, and I came back as the head of IT in the Department of the Taoiseach.
And was that a big change for you in terms of the role and the seniority of it?
It was, yeah. And it was also going from, large, huge processing departments with big IT, relatively big IT teams, to basically being the only person there responsible for everything. A small team of about 8 or 9 of us.
Okay, so this is the Department of the Taoiseach?
Department of the Taoiseach,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so 8 or 9 of you.
8 or 9 in IT, because it's a policy-led department.
Yeah, of course.
So IT was a facilitator in terms of, for office automation. There weren't a lot of applications around. There were a few Lotus Notes databases for kind of case management, case tracking. But I came in specifically with the role of implementing the e-government project, the e-cabinet project.
So give us background. I know this because obviously I was involved in some way in the front-end design, so I'm just clarifying that.
Yes.
But just explain to people who don't know what that project was about.
So there were 2 people in particular that stand out, from a business perspective, and that would have been Colin Butler and Peter Ryan, who was the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet at the time. And both of them had this vision that, like, everybody was drafting cabinet papers in every single government department in paper. They were emailing them around. They couldn't necessarily reach the whole, population who might have observations on a memo going to government. So they saw the benefit of, centralising that system, and kind of coincided with the CMOD actually deciding that, they were going to create the government network. Mm-hmm. So it was it was actually the first application to run on the government network. And we were being plugged onto the government network by Jim Leahy, like literally hours before we launched the application. So he was over with his screwdriver
plugging
us in.
So the concept was, look, everybody has to contribute, don't they, to policy beforehand, and it's all done through paper, so that you could go live. You could go in the Cabinet Office, administer, Cabinet Office room, and literally be able to see everything online.
Yeah. So there was 2. There was the front end and the back end, and whereas the back end the front end was kind of the sexy bit, like ministers sitting around the cabinet table with tablets. In the time the tablets were not a common feature, like back in 2002, I think.
Yeah,
we couldn't really get them. But the key efficiencies were gained by us being able to centralise. Say, one department was drafting a memo to Cabinet that 3 or 4 other departments might have a view on.
Yes.
Department of Finance would always have a view on if money was involved, or, there might be legal issues as well. So the back-end system was and we were using new technology. It was an XML authoring product. And we were enabling them to collaborate on documents. Again, 2002, when you think back,
yes,
that was quite ahead of its time. So each department was able to collaborate internally on the document, and then others could also give the permission to other areas to actually contribute to OBS on it as well.
And was that new? I mean, was there anybody else doing that? Or were we doing something innovative in Europe?
We were very much innovative. Definitely in Europe, if not the world, in being the first electronic cabinet solution. I think we had 2 or 3 countries came over afterwards to look at it and talk to us about how we did it, where there were 2 African countries who were sort of establishing their democracy at the time and setting up their cabinet, and they came over to have a look at what way we were doing it. But it was very much leading edge at the time.
And the money had to get signed off, and somebody had to sell the vision. Do you know who's behind that?
Yeah, well, I think as far as I'm aware, it was Colm and it was Peter Ryan as well. Okay. And I think it was probably an easy sell. It was a very visionary thing. But when the benefits of it were we had dispatch riders from the army riding around on a Monday before a cabinet meeting with, brown briefcases full of cabinet material.
Yeah.
We had ministers coming in on cars that could leave them. They were carrying really sensitive, confidential information around with them.
Yeah.
So from a risk perspective, it prevented a huge amount of risk in terms of, leaking of information and all that sort of stuff before it was meant to be published. Yes. So it was probably an easy sell. But again, as I said, it was a very, very leading edge. And it was quite a risk taking a risk because we went with a very small company, a very innovative company to deliver that.
How did you get that through? Because it's not easy, is it? I mean, no. We can talk about that in a little while, but how did that all happen that you got a fairly innovative small company to come in and do such a sensitive, important project?
Yeah, so again, that was CMOD actually had gone out and they were looking, and I think that was under Jim Duffy and Tim Duggan.
That's right, yes.
Jim and Tim, I suppose, at the time would have been there. And they had spotted this as a technology that they thought would have a use, and they had procured it. So, when we decided we were doing e-cabinet, it looked like an appropriate technology, that it would fit what we were trying to do. So we met with the company a few times. We looked at it. We looked at what it was capable of doing. They looked at our business challenges and we set the project up. And it was a very small project in terms of people that working on it.
Which must be different for you because that you're used to working with a large department and people. Yeah. So it was small because of necessity. Was the budget quite small, or
the budget was relatively small as well? Yeah.
How much was the budget? Do you remember?
I think it was under $1 million anyway, which at the time probably felt like a lot. But I'd have to look back at my records on it. But it came in under budget. It came in before time. It was actually. It was very different for me working in such a small team because, when you're working in the bigger teams sometimes and the bigger projects, and we had the governance, we had the proper governance, but, you were talking directly to the programmer, to the developer of the tool. So it was very unique in experience, but very, very enjoyable as well.
Do you prefer smaller, do you think?
I think they both have their benefits. The smaller projects, you have a lot more responsibility because you're it for everything.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more pressure. In a bigger organisation, there's a bigger team, there's more people to help out. But I think it depends on the business challenge that you're addressing and the area that you're in. Like having worked on big projects and small projects, they're appropriate really for what you're doing at the time.
Yeah. Well, Sandra Collins, who was in here, Dr. Sandra Collins, she was episode 3, I think. And she was saying, well, if you want to go fast, go solo. Go small. Yeah. If you want to go far, go big. I suppose it's relevant, is it? It's relevant to what you're talking about.
It is, absolutely, yeah.
There was a beginning and end to that project.
There was.
Yeah. And in terms of usage, I mean, you're talking about the cabinet ministers, aren't you? And how technology savvy were they when you were at that stage?
They weren't very techy.
I know, they weren't, because I remember somebody telling me they were printing off their emails.
They were printing off their emails at one point, yeah. They weren't, but I suppose there were 1 or 2 at Cabinet at that time who were actually, and I think Dermot Hearn was one of them. And he, I think, kind of peer pressure almost, he was very kind of visible and vocal in using his tablet and using it electronically, and that kind of filtered around the table a little bit. Now, they didn't all... some of them did print them out and bring them in, but what it did stop from our perspective was that they were carrying them around with them, or we were distributing them around from the cabinet office. So, and the back end collaboration piece as well.
Yeah, and everybody contribute to.
Everybody could contribute to it,
whatever
yes.
the subject was. But we're coming close to the end of this part, so we're going to do two parts because it's just too interesting, right?
Okay.
We're going to keep going because there's lots more exciting stuff. But during that time, you nearly had an incident, didn't you? A kerfuffle between the UK government and the Irish government. Was that right?
Oh, no, not quite between the government. No,
I'm exaggerating to make a point here.
Between the
technology.
Technology, between the press officers. So we had introduced a trial of the Blackberry for, like, you know, in the Department of the Taoiseach, as you can imagine, in any government department, the ministers and the Taoiseach travel quite a lot.
Yeah.
And at that particular time, we were establishing the agencies in Northern Ireland. It was post the Good Friday.
And who was the Taoiseach at that time?
Bertie Ahern was
Bertie
Ahern was the Taoiseach, and Tony Blair was his counterpart in the UK. So there was a lot of travelling around. There was a lot of travelling to Europe. And just, you know, for access to email, we introduced a Blackberry.
Mm-hmm.
So the Taoiseach had the Blackberry with him and was able to keep up to date if anybody needed him. We could send him a message or whatever. And we got a call. I got a call then from the Cabinet Office in the UK, one of my counterparts over there, asking why had we given our Taoiseach a Blackberry, because the Prime Minister was looking for one. Why couldn't he have his mail on the go? So it was a minor
one-upmanship going on in technology.
Yes.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, look, I think we just have so much more to cover. I mean, there's a lot going on in terms of your life, which is so interesting. But I want to thank you for part one, and I'm looking forward to part two. And I also want to thank the studio. Obviously, we're in South Dublin Podcast Studio. Thank you to our producer, Conla Moran. Thank you to the studio manager, Peter Rice. And on sound and video today, it's Lee Brennan. And thank you so much to our guest, Louise Jevens. Thank you.
Thank you, Maeve.